to start off, what is President Biden, and the First Lady for that matter, about to see today?
Sure. Thanks for having me. And again, thoughts to all the folks in Maui who were impacted here. The president going on the ground here in Maui today, I think the goal to accomplish a number of things. One, to express empathy to the survivors and the victims of the event, but also to show the full support of the federal government. The president's been very clear that all resources will be at hand to support the broader response and recovery efforts throughout the island. And I think that's his goal, is to make sure that everyone involved in that response understands that they'll have the full backing of the federal government and its resources.
What does that actually look like? What do people need now? And then what do they need, say, 12, 24 months down the line?
Sure. Great question. This is really the first mile or two of a marathon from a response and recovery perspective. Search and rescue is ongoing. I remember back after a few of the hurricanes we faced in Florida, the resources from these urban search and rescue teams from across the country, just incredibly valuable and supportive in the immediate response. Looking at things like sheltering, mass care, really providing for those immediate needs in the first couple of weeks. And then we'll start to talk about what the longer term response looks like. So kind of a transition in effect between the response and recovery efforts as we move forward. But, still folks in shelters, still lots of feeding ongoing by groups like the Salvation Army and others to provide for those survivors of the event.
I spoke with a senior official at FEMA earlier today, Lee, and we talked about the transition from rescue to recovery, and he gave us a sense that that was going to happen soon. How will that change the contours of this response?
Sure. And at that point, once you start to look at even short-term recovery into longer-term recovery, you're starting to look at things like housing, how you transition folks from a sheltering environment to their next step in recovery, making sure individuals who lost homes and businesses have the resources they need to get back on their feet. And then you really look at longer-term redevelopment. We're not even close to that point yet, but, what does that look like for the island, for the residents, for the people that are engaged in the recovery effort? So there's some gray area there, absolutely, between response and recovery, and we'll get there. You have to go through a comprehensive debris management process, which will be time consuming. But again, they're at the first mile or two in a marathon of a recovery for something this catastrophic.
Can you give us a sense, you work with a lot of natural disasters, give us a sense of potentially, are we going to see more of this because of climate change in the world?
I think that's the reality. That's the world we live in. Even just looking at the last couple of days between what transpired with the wildfires in Hawaii, tropical storms, tropical systems in Southern California, and really a pipeline of storms in the Atlantic Ocean right now. I think this is the new reality, and just adds to the urgency for jurisdictions and members of the public to talk about mitigation, to talk about resiliency, and how we bounce back quicker after these more frequent type of events.
To broaden that a bit, and with the images we're seeing from the Southwest, particularly areas around Palm Springs and California, the remarkable record flooding, we have a story today on the Bloomberg terminal, Lee. The U.S. has been hit by a record 15 weather and climate disasters that have cost $1 billion or more in losses this year through July. The first time that has ever happened. To what extent do we attribute this broader trend to climate change, knowing that we're in fact matching data from 1980 in this case?
Sure. It's hard to always look at one particular event and make those connections. But I think broadly speaking, again, this is the world we live in. These are events that we're seeing occur in greater frequency. And again, just goes to how resiliency and planning and looking at these longer term mitigation efforts, how important they are as we move forward. If you're a state or local elected official, if you're a state or local or federal emergency manager, this is a busy time for people in our business, and just adds to that urgency.
Yeah. Joe's talking about California. Well, at the same time, people were sheltering from Storm Hilary. Another natural disaster hit, a magnitude 5.1 earthquake. How does a state prepare for moments like that? Not just one natural disaster, but two.
Sure, we call them compounding events, almost an event or a disaster within a disaster. The good thing is the profession of emergency management has grown by leaps and bounds in the last couple decades. You have professionals at the state, local, federal, nonprofit, private sector level that this is their career, and their career is collaboration, bringing the stakeholders together to be able to plan for these events. So you have people that are right now just incredibly dedicated professionals working in emergency operations centers across the country and supporting the citizens that they serve. So again, a new reality, but something that we have a lot of folks that are out there right now working very hard to care for their communities.
As you talk about new realities, though, how do you plan for something, Lee, when it's never happened, when there's no historical precedent? Palm Springs needed to start planning for flooding. They're taking a boat to work. How do you plan for a climate that's changing under your feet?
Sure. I think in our business, we're pretty good at planning sometimes for the last disaster we experienced. So, your experience and your history goes to what you plan for in the future. And we have to get better at planning for these events we haven't faced before. This is going to continue. And you're going to have, things like we saw yesterday with the tropical storm landfall and an earthquake happening on the same day. So I think opening our imagination there for the types of events that we're going to face and providing the resources and the funding necessary to support those efforts.
Lee, who takes the charge here? Who's leading when it comes to all of this retrofitting, the science behind it? Is it the private sector or the public sector?
Sure, great question. Emergency management and resiliency is a team sport. It's a team effort. So there's really not one entity that's in that lead seat. It's a collaboration, and it's working together with all of the various levels of government and stakeholders involved to make sure that we're on the same page here, that we're looking at funding and we're looking at how to best prioritize certain projects. So I think the answer there is this is a team sport with everybody playing a role, to include the individual family, homeowner, and business owner.
All right, Lee, thank you so much for your time on this critical subject. Lee Mayfield, we really thank you this evening. Coming up, former President Donald Trump won't be at the Republican debate on Wednesday. We'll take a look at what to expect.